we haven't talked a whole lot about the alternatives to the present system, to some extent. You talk about some sort of community-based system that might be able to cut crime in half while costing only half as much. And of course, as by any cost-benefit analysis, this is great. I assume that this is based on the idea that the purpose is not so much to be simply being vindictive, but really to reintegrate people into the community, to get people, in some sense, I suppose, to take appropriate responsibility for what they've done, and in the process of that, get their lives back together. Can you elaborate a bit on what the alternative is? Now you said that this doesn't sell politically, and of course, well, part of our responsibility as public intellectuals, you being much more prominent than I, of course, is to change what's possible in the public arena, change what people might be willing to vote for. Well, what does the alternative look like? And so that I can have something in mind. Perhaps I suspect that your book actually deals with this for a bit, but I need to have my imagination invigorated to know what I should be arguing for.
And wouldn't it be fair to say, Glenn, that your book is more descriptive than prescriptive?
It is, and it's more making the moral argument that the current state of affairs is unacceptable than it is delineating a policy. But let me point to Mark Kleinman, whom I respect, and I've learned a lot from, the public policy professor at UCLA, whose Princeton University Press book When Brute Force Fails was published last year. Now, he says a couple of things. One, he says, is that with a well-designed ankle bracelet, I can get a lot of the benefits of incapacitation at much less cost, okay? So I can know where the former offender is at any point in time, because I've got a geo chip in the ankle bracelet and I got a satellite. I can make sure that if it's tampered with, I know about it immediately. And so I can revoke his parole or conditions of non-incarceration, and he knows that. I can make sure that if he wants to associate with any of his former running buddies to go and do some kind of crime, they can see the ankle bracelet just like anybody else and know that this guy is going to be monitored wherever he goes, so he doesn't make for such a good associate for criminal participation, and so on. So there is a possibility for staying on top of people and regulating and restricting to some degree their behavior without having to bear all the cost of incarceration. The key point, though, that you touched on is that it doesn't give us the retribution benefits. That is, if we wanted to punish, right? Punishment is not just instrumental, if it's not just utilitarian, but if it's also about moral expressiveness and, as it were, getting even, you know, the victims' families, you know, Osama bin Laden was just killed, right? Part of all the hoopla about that is that you know, it's a closure or it's a kind of just recompense or whatever it is, right? I mean, and so that's an element in the reason that we punish, and you don't get those benefits if you let people walk around with ankle bracelets. So the other thing, I'll just mention too, he has other ideas, but the other thing that Mark stresses that I think is really worth considering is that post-release supervision, the way it's run now, is very erratic. You've got a parole officer who is over, you know, burdened with too many cases, and you got, you know, whatever it is, 15, 20-minute meetings once every other week or whatever it is with the parole officer and the supervised person. You've got the person, they've got certain restraints, things that they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to be doing the drug thing. They're supposed to be getting employment. They're supposed to be showing up for their meetings and so forth. And they may or they may not do these things. And as Mark tells it, this is a very erratic process where, you know, the guy messes up, the guy messes up, the guy messes up, he gets another chance, he gets another, and then all of a sudden, he gets violated. And then once he's violated, he gets slapped with, you know, the remaining 2.5 years or whatever it was on his sentence. So there's this huge punishment, but the probability that it will be applied at any given violation is a small number, and it's all kind of... Mark says, no. If the guy fails the drug test on Friday, you lock him up until work hour on Monday morning, okay? And you do it for certain, okay? And you do it immediately. So this is, you know, it's a behavioral psychological kind of argument. He hears you. He understands that. That's not maybe if in the air some kind of abstract thing. That's, I don't get to see my girlfriend this weekend if I do those drugs on Thursday and have to show up for the test on Friday, okay? So he says, by restructuring the way in which we manage this important task of supervising people post-release, and by relying more for nonviolent and such offenders on community supervision, by which he means largely electronic supervision of people who are not being incarcerated, we could substantially reduce the numbers. Now, he's saying all of that, holding the law constant. I also want to back off the ratchet on the penalties. I want to get away from 3 strikes and you're out. Think about 3 strikes and you're out. So 3 felons and you're out, okay? Out meaning 25 to life. Okay? Now, everybody knows there's a life cycle curve in terms of the proclivity to offend, okay? It peaks at like 27 and starts going down. And by the time people are 40, 45 years old, even if they were hardened criminals, they're basically past their crime
what's
committing.
the point of having a 50-year?
So why have them in jail? Why have them in jail for another 20 years? I mean, you're using up a cell and it's 35 grand per person per year. That could have been holding somebody, you know, who was actually a little bit more dangerous. So what I'm saying is, to make it long story short, you're paying an awfully high price for that retribution benefit that you get from knowing that that guy's still in the cell. And I don't know that we have to do that.
I mean, it's awfully high. I mean, our sentences in many cases are too long, unnecessary. Not everything needs even an ankle bracelet. We need to reevaluate all of that in a sentence. And judges, we need to go back to more discretionary sentencing. In the last 10 or 15 years, judges have very little discretion. The juries make the decision of guilt or not, and it says in the code book, it's 20 years, 30 years, and that's it. You can't tailor it to 5 years in this case.
And you won't even let the parole boards in some states
make
the decision. No. You've got so-called truth in sentencing laws mandating by statute that people serve 70%, 80% of their original sentences, when the experience over the years within the institution would permit the institution to sort the wheat from the chaff, as it were, and to see that here's one that maybe we could let go.
But you can't use your
But they won't let them do that because the politics of it has
do you think there's a possibility of some kind of cycle here, that if part of the reason for the increase in punitiveness was the rise in crime that began in the 60s, and the racial dimension, as you've described it, was a contributing factor to allowing the thing just to continue, just to, like, I think you have a phrase in your book, like, the throttle got stuck, or I mean, it just kept going. But would it be possible that due to declining crime rates and possibly the economic stress that you're talking about, there would be a more favorable climate?
A readjustment.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think we will see that. I
think it's very possible.
States moving in that we just can't afford to keep doing it like this. And we need to think about alternatives.
The first part of your statement is also important, David, and I wish I had said this quite early on, which is to say, before 1970, the numbers were going down in terms of the incidence of incarceration, and there was a lot of consternation. There was a big, huge battle within American political culture about, you remember John Lindsay, who used to be mayor of this city? Okay? I mean, he's not Rudy Giuliani, he's John Lindsay. And, those polls stood for something, okay? So that the liberals were riding high. The Warren Court, with all of its, if you will, pro-criminal jurisprudence and so forth, the liberals are riding high, okay? But the crime rate is going up and up and up, and the reaction is building. So a guy whom I respect very much, James Q. Wilson, the political scientist, very important intellectual in the overall movement to increase the intensity of our incarceration regime. If you were to ask him, he's been around for a long time. He's seen a lot of stuff. If you ask him, what did he think he was up to? And I'm not saying I agree with him about everything, but I'm saying if you ask him what do you think he was up to, he was saying, these judges and these liberal politicians, they lost track of the importance of security and establishment of order as the first business of the state. They let things fall by the wayside. It needed to be rectified.
I tried to call him today to prepare for this thing, but I couldn't reach him because I was wondering if this cycle thing might make some sense to him, but I don't know. Do you know what he thinks today?
I don't know what he thinks about the cycle at our time. I know that he thinks that the reason why the numbers in prison went up and should have gone up is that the decades before 1970, had witnessed both a rise in crime and a decline in the intensity of punishment that had
Liberalism
gotten out of
with
west.
respect to punishment.
Yeah, liberalism off the rails.
Increasing crime rates,
Right.
and you get a big political social reaction.
Now add the racial aspect to that, because
Yeah.
you got that.
Yeah.
But you've also got the civil rights movement, and you've got the riots in the 60s. Now the civil rights movement, who can be against it? Well, it turns out a lot of Americans were against it. Okay? They lost. But they weren't done. Okay? Because the animus against the uppity Negroes who were over-asserting themselves ended up getting displaced into a kind of, well, you know, we got to keep law and order on the streets.
Law and order
okay?
and welfare queen.
So when the Warren Report in 1968 says, all those riots, that's the fault of white America, that's pretty much what the Warren Report, no, Kerner Report. Kerner Report.
Yeah.
Kerner Report. That's pretty much what the Kerner Report says in 1968.
Yeah.
It's white America that's the fault for the whatever. There was at least 35% of the electorate who were, call them Archie Bunker, who were infuriated by that.
Yeah.
Okay? And that force had to go someplace. Okay? So those rioters are blacks. The civil rights movement crests. It does what it can do on the statute book. You know, we get the Voting Rights and the Civil Rights Act. But it can't really protect people against this backlash that ends up getting filtered through the criminal justice system. This is more than one historian's interpretation of what has happened, and it makes a lot of sense to me.